Hello and welcome. Today we've got John Dowling, and today we are going to be discussing the currency revaluations, where we stand with the Iraqi dinar, the Zimbabwe, Vietnamese dong, what's going to trigger these currencies from revaluing. Donald Trump has said in the past that he's very worried and concerned about the devaluation of currencies. And very soon, one day, we'll all be on a level playing field because that's the way we can compete fairly and trade fairly. Um, and also the true black swan and the presentation that John's going to show us today. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Instagram channel at nicholas.veniamin, where you can follow all my daily news reels. John, thank you so much for joining me. How are you and what have you been up to?
Good to see you, Nicholas, as always. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege. Happy New Year to you. I've been frenetically busy, just meeting with a lot of people in the financial industry, doing interviews with them, and keeping our ear to the ground with our team of the appraisal of all a copious amount of information, as you know, is now starting to flood out precipitously, both in our communities and in the mainstream as well. So it's kept me rather busy. Got to spend some time with family over the holidays and kind of have a bit of a respite. And now I'm back in at it and very excited about what the near future holds for us.
Absolutely. So interesting stuff. Now, of course, I just mentioned, what the currency currency revaluations are a little bit, where what Donald Trump has said. And also we know the Federal Reserve have been applying currency manipulators on currencies all around the world, keeping their currencies weak so that the deep state are in complete control of them. I believe also that Iraq have tried to revalue 4 or 5 times in the past. And one of the ways that they've stopped their currencies from revaluing is the deep state attacking them, and also the Twin Towers and distractions, false flags. We know this. Would you like to, before we go into the presentation, just give the viewers a 1-minute explanation of what it is, like a slight genesis, if you like?
Sure. Very appropriate word to use. Yeah, basically, Nick, there's, just like we talked in the past, there's parallel presidencies, there's parallel economies, and there's parallel agendas, even good and evil, right? As we allude to Ephesians 6:12 about, flesh and blood enemies and so forth. So this has been going on in duality for quite some time. There's the Agenda 2030, which is the Great Reset. That's what the Illuminati cabal and the deep state are gunning for and would like to happen. But God has opened up for us portals and an opportunity to get the global reset, or the godly global reset, which is based in his money, gold and silver, which is old as time, and all mechanisms that tie to that in respect to the currencies, what we'll be talking about, bonds, cryptos, metals, and other things that people should do. We've touched on. And again, I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not constituted as financial advice. It's just what I'm doing and sharing that information so that God's giving, generous people can take advantage of this wealth transfer that's even greater, Nick, than going back into, you said, the Genesis. Speaking of that, it's going back to the time of Joseph, which supersedes that. We have never seen a wealth transfer like this in modern history, because as we know, in 2008 in America, that was the bailout with the banks that affected the real estate market. This time, it's the entirety of the global economy in every possible vector and every vertical that you could imagine. So this is a tremendous opportunity and happening for those who will take advantage of the information and take action accordingly.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting. And this is what the cabal doesn't want to happen. They want to just enslave us. They want to raise more taxes. They want to make us more sick because it makes them more rich when they, big pharma. And this is all a plan to enslave us. It's an evil plan that they've had for thousands of years. According to Alex Collier, it's 10,000 years. And we're living in a biblical time right now, where many people like Trump and many seers, if you like, are spreading the truth, and the frequency of Earth is increasing, and there's a shift in consciousness, and we're now starting to see some kind of responsibility that we are now taking to get rid of the deep state and to have prosperity for our brothers and sisters around the world. So why don't we go through your presentation and we'll take it from there as well, because I know you got a presentation for the viewers.
I do. Thank you for that opportunity once again, Nick. Let me get that queued up for you. And let me just bear with me a second here as I go through this. And let's see. Okay, let me know when you can see the full screen here.
Oh, yes, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'll just breeze through the beginning parts, and we're talking about, as I said earlier, the focus with you today, Nick, and your audience respectively, is God's upcoming breakthrough. Because I believe now that we're in the new year, we are at the tipping point. President Trump, as you alluded to himself, said many months ago that we were going to see a major crash in the next 12 months. I believe he was alluding to this year. I believe we're going to see what's called a flash crash, which is a 50% correction, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So the primary topics we'll be discussing is the dollar update, where we are at present day, where we see it going throughout the entirety of the year, which dovetails what we just talked about with the crash, Iraq, and Prime Minister al-Sudani's role integrally in the transformation of Iraq coming back to the international stage, how Iran plays prominently in this, both internally and externally out of Iraq, Zimbabwe, and we'll bake in Vietnam into that as well, as you know, because they all are close cousins. Bank and business failures, which is pretty significant, because that is another thing that President Trump and many other people in the know have talked about would be happening this year with respect to massive layoffs, so on and so forth. What that means for the entirety of the world in terms of change and how it will affect people globally. And then final conclusion and wrap up, and then questions that you might have accordingly. Sound good?
Oh, sounds brilliant. Love it.
Okay, so well, let's start off with the dollar update. So we see that, forgive me, we see that the dollar is taking a major pullback with respect to Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Both countries have said that they're, Iraq has said that as of January 1st, they're moving away from the dollar trade and commerce. So if you were a business person and you've been doing existing business in Iraq years prior, more than likely you'll be able to get dollars in and out because you have an existing relationship. You'd be grandfathered in. But outside of that, new business, new ventures, no more dollar. And the Central Bank of Iraq has pretty much put out that edict. I did a show last week on my weekly wrap-up that people can check on our channel, where I kind of gave some clues that our fiscal year in England and America, Nick, as you know, is October 1st. Most people, when they associate the calendar, they think that's the fourth quarter. That's of the calendar year, but of the fiscal year, it's actually October 1st, right? And with economists, that's fairly common knowledge. Iraq, respectively, it's April 1st. So when the CBI says, hey, we're going to get rid of the dollar and re-implement the dinar by the end of the year, they're talking about the end of the calendar year of 2023, divorce is 23, and in April 1st begins this year in 24. So what they're telling you is a kind of a calm or a clue that anywhere between now and that point, which would be roughly the next 60 days, give or take, that's when they're planning to do it. Historically, they've done it around April, which is why they allude to that secretively. Last year, as you recall, in February, about a year ago, they did a small revaluation, not a reinstatement, because again, a reinstatement is going back to the original rate, which they've done before, like Vietnam. The revaluation is just a correction in terms of what they're dealing with, right? So they did it and brought it down to 1,300 just to prove, Nick, that they could do it. They don't need to be in the World Trade Organization. They don't need to do reforms. They could do this anytime they wanted to. But this is part of the script that they need to follow in the bigger agenda, for better or for worse. So that's what we're alluding to with the dollar. You see here President Trump on Right Side Broadcasting on his Truth Social said a very important comm last week, as you know, that he will never allow the creation of central bank digital currency when elect. He's saying if, but we already know he's commander in chief. So he's giving clues to the general public about what he's planning to do to do a demolition on the deep state economy that we've been enslaved in for so long. So that's an important thing that also tells you what's coming for the dollar as well. Harry Dent, a chief economist, you can see an article here, and we put links as well so people can see that. He's saying that the mega crash is coming this year, which is a signal to the elites and the current wealthy. In the old system, you're going to start seeing them sell off. Warren Buffett already got rid of a lot of his stocks many years ago to that point. I also encourage people to take a look at it potentially if they want to, no pressure, donate to Search for Dinar, because they do. I've donated a few bucks to them because they do put out great articles. They're one of the few publications that really does deep dives with consistency in respect to Iraq for the information that we're all eagerly anticipating. Now we go forward up here. Al-Sudani, we alluded to him. He is the current prime minister of Iraq. Very important to highlight him because, as you see, he's working with Saudi Arabia. As you know, about a week plus ago, Saudi Arabia put their optical tent pole in the sand and is helping Iraq to ascend into the World Trade Organization because obviously they're the first BRICS member and they carry a lot of weight. They're still the number one oil producing country in the world. Well, I would say primarily in the Middle East, to be precise, and Iraq is close behind them in that order, right? And they also have some of the most amount of gold in the Middle East as well, which is not a coincidence. He met recently in Davos, as we know, last week. Now, I've been in this for about 11 years, or some people have been in it 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And the people I've talked to, they don't remember a time in recent history where Iraq has been so prominently represented in Davos like this year, because we're at the tipping point. So he has met with the IMF, International Monetary Fund. He's also met with the International Finance Corporation. Basically, he's telling them behind closed doors that Iraq is getting ready to come back. He is literally putting his life on the line to bring Iraq back to the international stage. Now, he is the fourth prime minister, I believe, in the last 4 to 5 years. They had Dr. Shabibi in 2010 when we thought this was originally going to happen. That was just before the time I got into this, when I did my back study research. And then we had Abadi, who I still believe is working with the citizens. He feels badly that he didn't keep his promises to the people. He said he would get it done and put his life on the line, and that obviously did not happen. So he's trying to work behind the scenes to help the citizens to uprise and take back their country. You have to remember that Iraq is a country that's roughly the size of California, 30 to 40 million people. And what's interesting, Nick, about them is, in doing research a few years back, roughly 60% of that population is under the age of 30. So it's a very young contingency of citizens. They don't remember the previous wars 30, 40 years ago. They don't really have I'm sure they've studied, but they weren't around when that stuff happened. So this is a brave new world for them, but there's still a contingency of older population there that was there, remember, that can rear them up properly and get them galvanized for what's happening. And the point is he's behind that. And then we have Mustafa Kadhimi, and now we have Sudani. What I'm getting at is that Kim Clement, we always talk about, said in this prophecy, nothing, 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 then something. This is now the fourth prime minister. Could this be the something? We believe so. Okay. You can see Saudi Arabia backs. There's another article kind of substantiating that. And he's also talking here with JP Morgan, which we know will be one of the key players for the banks for the wealth transfer exchange. Also, I believe, Wells Fargo is close in concert with that. All the major banks will most likely play a role, but I would be focusing personally on JP Morgan and Wells Fargo to be the chief players. And then also there's this article right here. Sudani meets with 57 businesses at meetings in Davos, most likely to talk about, reconstruction, tax reforms at the border, to collect monies internally, like many states and countries already do that are actively have an active currency, like yours in England, for example. And then to let them know, hey, we're coming back and this is how we're doing it. This is our strategy for it. Okay, so let's see, I'm trying to get to the next slide here. Don't know what happened here. Sorry about that. Oh, okay, there it goes. A little bit of a delay. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we have Iran, and how Iran prominently plays a role in this is that they have just recently joined the BRICS, but they have a duality role because they are also proxy government in Iraq. So they're the big brother to Iraq. So they've been keeping the rate suppressed down is to keep it the status quo so they could do all this money laundering with the dinar. That is now beginning to cease. And you're going to see Maliki, who's a holdover from Obama in 2010, who was implemented to work with Obama to keep them down as status quo. As Iraq gets all their bills, taxes, and tariffs, and the oil and gas each sale into Parliament, which we believe will be not in the not too distant future because I think they've done it behind the scenes, you're going to see a case where Maliki and all of his proxy Iranians are going to go absolutely ballistic. And then Iran is also tasked with being the scapegoat for the U.S. deep state because they're trying to incite war right now. And they're going to use Iran as part of the script to do that, which we're going to talk about towards the end of the show when we talk about what we believe the black swan event to be, because it all kind of correlates. But Iran has run into the shelter of the BRICS, which, as I've said on other shows, might go against them because the greater strength for them is the U.S. military. The U.S. military, I think about a week and a half ago, we just implemented 1,500 additional troops as redundancy. They'll say it's for the fighting, but the real reason, Nick, I believe, is that when all these aforementioned items go off, you're going to see the Iranian proxy government go nuts and try to stop the reset. And then that's when our military will go in and pull them out. So that's basically what that boils down to. Okay, so we talk about Zimbabwe now, and we put a little bit of highlight on them because they've been really ramping up their communications, respectively, in the public eye. They are now talking about recently this week, government to announce new measures to stabilize the Zim dollar. But you tie that together here with Nelson Chamisa, which is important because he is a godly man. He was asked by China's Republic, not the CCP side, because as you know, there's two sides. We talked earlier about dualities and everything we do. Same applies here. He was asked by the good side of China, the Republican Xi, to run, just like, Trump has worked with Xi and many other leaders to do the exact same thing. So he is saying right here, you and I have talked, Nick, before about Zimbabwe has the most amount of gold in the world and that they can be literally the breadbasket to the world. Well, notice what he says in this article. Zimbabwe shall soon resume and reclaim its breadbasket status, right? It will lead excellently and differently. We can feed the world. Well, how do they do that? Through finances and their rich crops and resources, waterfalls and such. They will be a gold nation, a wealthy nation. And here's the key here I see. A reconciliation upon being a God-honoring nation are the key ingredients or cornerstones to this happening. So you can see that the true leaders, just like President Trump, I believe he's working with these other leaders to kind of be the mouthpiece for him indirectly to say what he has already said and will say as he optically steps back in. You're starting to see a repetitive narrative throughout the entirety of the world. You saw it with Javier Milei when he stood up to the World Economic Forum. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But you can see that they have the blueprint to do this. So Zimbabwe will be they already are, a very wealthy and rich country, which will be the breadbasket to the entirety of the world, which specifically, I believe, points to the Zim bonds and the dollars. As some will know, a bond is a debt until the country that's backing it gets behind it. Well, that's what he's getting ready to do. So that's what I want your audience to key in on, is not where they are, but where they will soon be. And just finishing up with, Zimbabwe, he just put out a notice a couple days ago, the power of a visionary leadership, oneness for everyone. So he's really bringing in inclusivity with his people. They just did a video here highlighting Zimbabwe. It's with the current corrupt leader, Emerson Mnangagwa. But the thing to focus on is that they're highlighting all the wealth and the assets that we just talked about that Zimbabwe so clearly has. So it's putting more of a spotlight on Zimbabwe so the rest of the world can become aware of it. And then you see this tweet that he just did here, working on 2023 to correct electoral fraud and error. Where does that sound familiar? We've not heard that before anywhere else. Now we turn our attention to bank and business failure. So Citigroup last week, their CEO Fraser addressed the managing directors, which is a pretty big deal. He didn't just address the low-level employees, which would have been enough, but he's actually going after the high-level managing directors and the shareholders most likely. And he's telling them in parlance that he's going to lay off roughly 20,000 workers over the next 2 years, which translates to a $1.8 billion loss. Now, for them, they're printing funny money anyway, but to the public, that sends a strong message that one of the top 5 banks, at least here in the US and throughout the world, is failing pretty significantly, right? So let me turn your attention over here to the right. Sports Illustrated, which is a huge iconic publication here in America for many, many years. This past Friday, as you can see in this article, they sent a mass email to all their employees. All their employees have just been laid off summarily. That's a pretty significant sign. You were talking earlier about the mainstream. When the mainstream starts to put a emphasis on this, that's the official writing on the wall, because they've done their level best to try to cover the stuff up that they know has been going on in the background for quite some time. But you're now starting to see it hit front of center. So the drumbeat gets louder and louder, basically. Extenuating that conversation, Nick, to your home country, just yesterday we saw an X22 report in UK. More than 47,000 businesses are getting ready to go out of business. That's a pretty significant hit, I would think you would imagine. And you can see The Guardian has posted this right here. CBS News, again, just to point out the mainstream, has said that Macy's is rejecting a $5.8 billion buyout ahead of layoffs, store shutdowns. So Macy's is one of, in America, our most iconic companies in retail. Everybody knows them. The May company has been around for, I want to say, somewhere between 110, 120 years. It's an iconic company. The Macy's Thanksgiving Parade that you probably see annually. It's a big deal. I've frequented Macy's most of my life as a kid. And last year, I went in to get some cologne, and I happened to notice that a couple of the lights were out in the men's department. And it wasn't a light bulb issue. It wasn't a technical issue. They were just literally shutting down power in non-traffic areas to save a buck anywhere they could. That was very telling to me, the writing on the wall. And that was 9 months ago. So I started seeing it, and it was rumored that Macy's was going to go out of business last year. I think you're going to see February to April this year, you're going to see them and a lot of other companies that will be a surprise to most people going out of business summarily. So again, these are wake-up operations. These are historic events in many, many different ways. Here's another article here. Came out, I think, late last week. Google, Citigroup, we talked about BlackRock and Amazon are going to announce major job cuts. So you're going to see this continuity of layoffs and firings and shutdowns, and all that stuff is contributory to the dollar crashing and had the market having a major correction. That's how it all correlates. Okay, and then we see in your country here, this is to me an Assara marker for those who are in the know, because when the king goes, that starts to take everything down. As you know, Prince William is set to take over the reign for King Charles, but I don't think he'll actually do it because there's really no more leaders to overlord and subjugate. So what I tie into this is markers. We know that the Vatican, we know that Parliament, we just talked about in DC, the corporation, the Cabal Corporation specifically, have all been on a triad target, right? So we see what's happening in England. You know what has been talked about with the Pope, and everybody's got their opinions on that. But I think they're getting ready to take down whoever that is. And I believe between now, I shouldn't say me, but me and my team specifically believe in what we can research and what we prayed about and what we can intuit from all this, that the Biden, whoever that is, between now and the end of February will step down due to what? An undisclosed medical illness. So they're going to use health issues as the cover story, as the excuse as to why these so-called leaders are stepping down, which is a sign, obviously, geopolitically, and an Assara marker as corruption is taken down and they don't have a war. The deep state is desperately trying to create one because they need a cover story for the reset. They're not going to get a war, but they're going to get threats and rumors of war, which is a very big difference, because President Trump said that he was going to take us to the brink. He was going to take us to the precipice of the cliff and then pull us back. And this is designed wholly to get as many people in the whole of society, which is not your viewers, but the whole of mainstream society, to wake up and see what's happening. And I think anybody who's gone to the gas station or the grocery store or bought anything of significance clearly can see something's happening. Just last night, we caught this, so we try to be as current as we can. This was on the U.S. debt clock, right? So you can see the fish, which is a sign of Christ and the of his salvation, and you see the Liberty Bell. So it's signaling freedom and a gold standard for the entirety of America, because as you know, as America goes, the rest of the world follows summarily. But you're seeing more and more of these comms on the U.S. debt clock as they start to alert people what's incoming. Again, we were talking about Javier Milei, so we're saving him for here. Pretty significant. Kevin Roberts, I'm sure you saw this and most of your viewers saw it. He is the president of the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, a very conservative Christian group, thankfully, basically slammed Davos right to their face and called them basically imperialist pigs, and that their days are numbered. And then echoing that, Javier Milei, the current president of Argentina, as you know, a couple of months ago, devalued their currency by 50%. Why? Because we believe they're going to break it down to rebuild it up in the new asset standard, or whatever is assets are in the ground of their respective country, which is many, many different things. I actually listened to the speech, and just breaking it down, it was very interesting, Nick. What I heard him say was socialism has failed everywhere it's tried. Venezuela certainly knows that, chief amongst any other country. Fourth largest economy in the world. And yes, the Boulevard will make a resurgence for those who continue to ask that question. I just want to get that out of the way. They will act everything historical replication. So what was great will become great again, right? Reversing of the old guard. But he's talking about long live freedom. He also said something that really caught my attention. He said, we are living in the greatest economic prosperity in time in our history, and it starts this year. So that was a shot across the bow for patriots the world throughout. So you can see some very prominent leaders basically gave Davos the what for. So that's pretty much the conclusion of it. I will just touch base on a couple little ancillary details. We didn't talk about Vietnam. Vietnam, we know, is going to be very close in proximity to Iraq once Iraq revalues as a ribbon cutter, or I should say reinstates. Once Vietnam reinstates, because as you know, both countries have done this before in the past. Vietnam, for those who don't know, in the 1940s, they were at $4.07 to the US dollar. And they said in some articles that we put on our Telegram months ago that they were going back to 1940s pricing. That means that's a marker. When Saddam Hussein was a little kid in the 50s, they were actually up to $5. So it's not that we're telling you the rate, we're just telling you what they're saying historically is going to return. And then you got to remember, Nick, very important point, they're going like the rest of the world on a digital asset-backed economy, right? So they have enough gold. Iraq is 30th in the world in gold reserves, and I believe they're in the top 5 in the Middle East, which is significant. So they have the gold to back their currency, which they're going to do. Likewise, Vietnam will reinstate in 2 main things, silver and Litecoin. Pretty significant for those who may not know that. So Vietnam right now is quietly getting ready to reinstate. And the way that you can know that is the discussion widely about China-Taiwan. We know that's a staged event and it will not last very long. And that's Xi's ability to go in and break up communism behind the scenes enough to create an opening for Vietnam to go through and revalue in those said assets and oil and many, many other things, and the tremendous manpower and manufacturing that those who know they've had for many years. So I just wanted to touch base on Vietnam real briefly, that they are not far behind Iraq once this thing gets rolling optically. Now, as you mentioned, the Black Swan event, there's a lot of discussion about the Black Swan event. Our team has done a lot of research and study and prayer about this. We believe the Black Swan event is here, and it comes down to this: supply chain and oil. Now that Iran has been inflamed as part of the script, they are in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. You've seen missile attacks over there from, I believe it was Jordan and Pakistan last week. I know that Russia and Iran met about a week and a half ago to discuss this process, so no coincidences in the kingdom of heaven. And so you're going to see them get involved in the Strait of Hormuz and already in the Red Sea. What does that mean? That means the supply chain for food and clothes and other supplies will start to shrink up, because there'll be an artificial blockade in those areas. And then that's also going to suppress the oil. So I believe we will see in the not too distant future oil at $150 to $200 a barrel very quickly, because it's been set for this moment, part of the wake-up operation. So obviously, to your viewers, stock up on your supplies, your medicines, your pet medicine, whatever you need on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, and just top off at the tanks when you can. I have a 5-gallon gas tank in my garage that I have for emergency purposes. So this way, when gas lines like the 70s start to happen, I have a supply, and just have cash on hand. Personal recommendation to others is have 1s and 5s as opposed to 20s. The reason being is all the computer systems will be shut down. The banks will be shut down for a number of days, could be, 4, 7, 10 days. Nobody knows for sure, but it'll be for a short period of time. So when you need to get gas or you need to go to the farmer's market or grocery store in your area. You might want to target small mom and pop businesses. You'll have change so that they won't have to break the chains. Like you go with something, say, I don't know, you bought tissues and some grapes or something, and it costs $6, and you give them 20 and they can't break it, you're out $14, as opposed to if you have ones and fives, you just give them the change and then they can give it to somebody else behind you who might be in need. So it's just a very practical recommendation. So that's the conclusion of that point. And just as always, we talk about Kim Clement, and a lot of his prophecies are coming true when things seem at their worst and they're getting to that point. I'll free my people, nothing, something, a break in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. That's the other part people need to remember. And then, of course, the verse, is one of my favorites. The key here is having a faith and a vision for the things you don't physically see, but you need to see with your spiritual eyes, which is Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. Key word. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Wow, thank you very much, John. Very good presentation there. I really enjoyed that. So obviously the CBDC doesn't look like it's going to happen because Trump's very adamant about not allowing for it to be created, which means, does that mean that we're going to keep cash? Does it mean we're going to keep all the currencies? How do you see that?
Yeah, so two different things, Nick. Firstly, there are banks now that people can go to. We talked about in the past, as you know, on your shows, credit unions, military banks, USAA, things like that, that are actively not participating in FedNow and CBDC. So I always encourage people to do their research and have a number of banks. I have an account with Wells Fargo. They're not by any stretch perfect, but none of the big banks are. But I'm with them because they're the flagship bank for the reset. And then I'm going to transition away, which I've already started to do, in credit unions and small family-owned banks. So as far as cash, I think we'll have cash for a period of time because you still have, an older contingency of society who's accustomed to cash, is comfortable with it. Even, younger people still like to have cash on hand. Middle-aged people like to have it. It's just very practical. I think we will see the Federal Reserve note go away. Had been silver certificates in circulation, or been taken out of circulation rather, for quite a while. I wouldn't be surprised to see a resurgence of that. I think once Trump's back in optically, you're going to see a lot of these things kind of shift gradually. Yes, we will have cash for a period of time. How much time? I don't know. My speculation would be for the next, 4 or 5 years, maybe, as we transition. But we are going into a new digital economic reality, which short-term is good for Christians to take advantage of the wealth transfer. I see comments where people say the digital economy is bad. Yeah, they're half right. It's not bad right now, but as 2030 comes along, it will be very important for people to become their own central bank.
I believe that the technology is not bad. It's only bad because it depends who's going to be controlling it. If bad people are controlling it, it's bad. If good people are controlling it, digital is easier. So it all depends. I think the technology is good, but it's who's controlling the technology. Now, before we go on level playing field with the currencies, as Trump has mentioned, how much do you think that, in order to help people, how much Iraqi dinar currency should they be holding at least?
Okay, and I'll answer that, but just want to back up to the point you made. Yes, it's all just like the internet. The internet's good and bad. It just depends on how it's being used and who's running the systems and what the purpose behind it is, right? That's the good and evil side, as we discussed. But the point is that we're going to have a window of time where God's giving people and, good people throughout the world who have pure intentions to do the right things and do projects and things that are on their heart will be able to leverage this digital arena in the short term for good. But the key is to become your own central bank and control your assets, have land, metals, a food source, things like that. As far as dinar, that's a discernment thing. You have to go to God and ask him that question. That's a personal thing. I can't tell people you should have this or that. It depends on what God tells you to have. It depends on some people, God might not want them to have dinar. He might want them to have dong or zim or the Thai baht or the bolivar, many, many other currencies, or a combination thereof. So that's a discernmental thing that everybody has to kind of go and pray about and see what's right for them.
So what did God tell you about the dinar? How much did he say you need to have?
He never gave, yeah. He never, that's a good question. He never gave me a specific amount. He just said that it would happen. And it was never a question of if, but when. I think that he's given me time, like others. You know, I bought a certain amount in 2012, and then I've quietly added to it. I just bought some over the holidays because I had the ability to do so, thankfully. So I think that, you know, if you have the ability to get it and it's not going to hurt your budget or it's not going to hurt your income streams and your overhead, and God tells you to get it, then get it. But the point is, whatever people have, whether it's 500,000 dinar, 10 million dinar, some people have shoeboxes of it, billions. God can take, like the loaves and fishes, he can take whatever you have and multiply it. Because here's the good news, Nick, because we're going on a digital asset-backed economic reality, I don't think people need to be concerned about the rate. I see that a lot. Focus on what you're going to do with that money, how other people besides you and your family would be blessed by it, what projects, what initiatives do you have. Focus on the aftermath and not the rate, because I think people are going to be very pleasantly surprised going as a digital asset-backed and economy with a suppression that all these countries have been facing. You'll be surprised at how good the rate's going to be.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'll be leaving a link below in the description because a lot of people are asking about dinars, dongs, Zimbabwe dollars, and the link's going to be in the description so you can get that now. But John, thank you so much for your presentation. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
Well, thanks again for having me as always, Nick. It's a privilege. To your viewers, I would say, stay vigilant. I know you're tired. I know you're frustrated. I know we're all dealing with pressures of sundry kinds. Stay the course, pray, keep your faith. And the most important thing that I can tell your viewers, don't ever give up. Don't ever quit. Because Thomas Edison once said, people quit too soon before they realize just how close they were to actually succeeding.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, John. And we'll speak again very soon. You take care. Bye-bye.
You as well. Thanks, Nick.